Hey, welcome back to That Trucking Gospel, where we talk about everything and anything about the trucking industry. And today's guest is the Samantha Jones.
And I'm still gripping wood, still tipping, baby, sitting sideways. Texas heat on the candy paint, in and out of county lanes. Baby, I love to swing. Find me posted on the corner with a couple cold Coronas and some outlaws out today. When we started, we were sober, baby, it ain't even over. They gon' have to drag us out this place. Yeah, it's different down here.
Sam has been in the logistics industry for over 5 years. She is an excellent teacher and has a ton of passion for this industry. She has graduated with a bachelor's in business operations management, and she's the owner of her own consulting firm. Sam, welcome to That Trucking Gospel. I appreciate you joining us today. And we've known each other for a little bit, so this is going to be an excited conversation. Really want to spend time on what you've been doing, where you've been at, what road you're taking, if you will, right now. So if you don't mind, let's start with, what do you have going right now? What are you doing with your daily life?
Yeah, that's a big question. I feel like I'm doing a lot, but this is kind of like a reunion. Chris and I, for anybody who doesn't know, we worked together for a number of years back in our days at ArcBest. So that's how I got my start in the industry. I did outside sales and then moved into a director of enterprise sales role at ArcBest, and then I left there a few years ago and joined a startup company as their vice president of revenue. And I helped them co-found a sister company, actually, which was a full truckload brokerage. And I scaled that for right around a year. And then I decided I wanted the next challenge. And initially, I kind of thought I was going to go find another startup or brand new company and help them scale and maybe then move to the next. But I decided if I just started my own consulting company, then I could help a lot of companies do that at the same time and continue to move from one to the next and make impacts in more places. So that's what I'm doing now. I own Samantha Jones Consulting, and I do sales and brand strategy consulting for logistics providers. I actually work with asset carriers and brokers, even like trailer leasing companies or technology companies. And I just use all my expertise in this industry and help companies scale.
Yeah, and I've known you for a long time, so you're going to be great at anything. But if I had to pick something that you should be doing, I think you're in that lane right now. So
Yeah.
I know anybody you work with, I'm sure I can speak for them right now that you're a huge value to their team. So congratulations on that, by the way. That's fun. So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So right now, if you had to make a choice, and I know you're still early in it, but if you had to build a company or buy a company, which one would you choose?
Oh, absolutely build. Um, with the exception of maybe buying an authority with age, if I was going to go the broker route or asset route, there's obviously just some initial things that make life a little more complicated when you're coming into it with a brand new authority. But I've done that too, so I can say that that's not impossible either. And I say build because when you get to build something from the ground up, you're in control of that foundation. And that's going to be so important. And so if I was going to try to buy a company, I don't care if there's 3 people or 300 people there. Those weren't people that you chose. That's not a culture that you set. Those aren't processes that you created, even customers that might be the ones you want. So but that's also the control freak in me coming out, right? Where I want to make sure that I know everything about it, and that I was able to build it the way I wanted. So I don't think there's really ever a bad time to start a company.
Yeah, I think that authority piece is actually huge. I mean, I feel like sometimes when you start a new company, man, the industry makes it very challenging for you to be successful in that first year, 2 years, maybe even sometimes 3. I'm sure you can speak to that more than any of us.
Insurance is one of the major things. Insurance is a lot more difficult to get something that's
You're higher risk when you're new.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I know for the first year or two, it was just a headache getting insurance. And now that we've made it into the third year, I think the price is like half of what we were paying originally. So,
And that's just on the broker side too. That's not even counting.
no, on the carrier side, you can't even sign up for certain customers and run direct. You can run for customers like TQL, and those people pay you pennies on the dollar. So it was very difficult for us to get started. I know I was the only one here at that time, but I'm glad that those days are over with for sure.
Absolutely. No, I mean, that's a really good point. It's kind of like our whole industry is always in that, very classic chicken or the egg debate where even on the brokerage side, a lot of times brokers who are starting out who want to do it themselves without being like an agency model where you're running through someone else, um, you have to immediately go get insurance and then you have to start paying your carriers quickly to build up that credit because you're not going to have a credit profile. Well, to pay carriers in 7 to 14 days, you don't get paid for your shippers in 30 if you're lucky. So,
Yeah. It's a cash
how are you
flow
floating
business.
that cash? Are you cash heavy to start a brokerage? Probably not. Probably not. And so I bring that up because to get a factoring partner to work with you, they want to see age and experience and credit history. But that's not something you're going to have when you just started a business. So the whole industry is really kind of at odds with itself. And it gets exacerbated too, obviously, in markets like this with so much financial risk, interest rates being high, a lot of people going out of business unexpectedly, fraud running really rampant. So it is harder than ever to do it. It can be done, but it's a grind for sure right now.
Yeah. How does that translate into the shipper side, right? So we're talking a little bit about fraud and double brokering. You've already said how hard it was for a new broker to start. Where does the shippers care about that? I know I've talked to a
Yeah.
couple of shippers where they're trying to require the broker to be on the BOL. So when they check in, they're making sure that it's the correct broker as well. They have their little check calls to try not to fraud and double brokering happen either. But from your perspective, how does that translate? Like what kind of conversations have you had from a shipper's perspective when it comes to that double brokering fraud and new authorities?
Yeah, the new authority one is huge, right? And so most shippers, the most standard, I guess I would say, requirement is you have to be at least a year old before they'll work with you. Which, to be honest, I can't say I really fault them for that because what I think there's a statistic in not just transportation, right, but in any business that 90% of new businesses will fail in the first year. So if they bring you on in month 3 and they take the time and they invest in you, and then in 9 months you're out of business, how did that really help them, right? So I think it's almost in a sense, it's like, okay, I understand where they're coming from to say, let's make sure they prove themselves, and then we can give them that opportunity. I would say that if you're in a unique situation as a business, where like when I started Rocket Logistics, we had a sister company that was 3 years old that was really helping us get off the ground, right? So we leaned a lot on the financial stability and backing of an established company, and we were able to work right past that obstacle of the 1 year authority issue. But we had to be really good at articulating that, working around it, and acknowledging it. So from that would be my advice too to brokers and carriers is to just get in front of it. Don't try to hide behind it. Don't try to hope it doesn't come up in conversation. When you confidently like bring up the issue before it's an issue and you explain why it's a non-issue, you have a lot
Yeah.
better chance of overcoming that
Amen.
than
Yeah.
than if you
So
don't.
speak truth is all I'm hearing. And what
Yeah,
motto do we live by over here?
Truth and transportation.
Bringing truth back to transportation.
there you go.
It's crazy you say that, and that's some of my past too. Like, quit sugarcoating stuff. Just tell them where you're at, and they're going to meet you there or they're not. I mean, that's simple
Yeah.
as that. What lane are you good at? What niche are you in? And kind of know your lane.
And
Kind
we
of
started as well with the asset side with Prosperity Transportation. And that you're 100% right. It allowed us to build unity and to use Prosperity to borrow money to be able to pay the other carriers that were helping us out. And
Yeah.
over a year or two, finally we got it up off the ground, and we are to where we're at now. To where you're right, customers don't want to pay for 30 days, 40 days. Luckily, we had a customer as well, by God's grace, who was paying us in 7 to 10 days.
I know. And
So we were
oftentimes it's those
blessed.
smaller guys or medium-sized shippers too. So, I mean, it's okay to start small. Like everybody's going to start with a different amount of resources when they're growing a company. And I mean, to this day, when I'm consulting, I've consulted with $5 million brokerages, $17 million brokerages, $55 million brokerages, and $110 million brokerages. So I see a lot of different ranges. I've done trucking companies with 200 trucks and trucking companies with 14 trucks. And so I understand what what that looks like when you're having conversations, when you're talking about your credit, your cash flow cycles, and all these different things. And the reality is, like, the larger you get and the stronger your cash flow becomes, the less dependent you are on certain types of pay terms or your broker partners, or maybe you have a line of credit now, or you can self-fund things, and you just start to get more optionality, right, as you grow. But I think the reality is just never lose sight of where you want to get to, but do what you have to do in those first couple of years to make sure you survive the first couple of years, right? And
Right.
so it's kind of like forcing yourself to take small bites at first and see some steady progress. And then, year 2, year 3, go for it, blow it up, kill it, and get to that 20 million, 50 million, $100 million mark, whatever it is that your goal is.
Hey, let's take a quick break for a minute to say thank you to our sponsor, Unity Brokering, for this show today. Unity Brokering focuses on optimizing your supply chains, leveraging the relationships with their customers and their carriers. If you would like to get in contact with Unity, please email dispatch@unitybrokering.com. Let's get back to the show. It's crazy how it's a cash flow business on the broker side. Like, it's all about that cash flow and ensuring that you have that working capital sitting there for when maybe a new customer doesn't pay you for 60 days. And it's kind of a weird conversation, right? It's like, we we got to pay quicker, but at the same time, I appreciate
Yeah,
your
I mean, so
business.
that's the beauty. That is really the beauty of factoring. And I think that a lot of people, I've had conversations about this on my own podcast before, where a lot of people kind of have this like negative thought process around factoring companies. And I would also like to say that I have heard shippers multiple times say, we don't allow our partners to use factoring companies. We don't pay third parties. Shame on you, really. Like, if you're a shipper with anything over 30-day pay terms and you want your brokers to treat their carriers well, and which means pay them in 30 days or less, you're putting this cash flow crunch onto your provider, which in my mind, like, the rates just went up to service you now, and that's what happens, right? So now I'm going to throw in a little bit more margin on your lanes because it is difficult for me to manage your 60, 90, 120-day pay terms are a thing now, quite often in the enterprise shipper space. And imagine if they weren't going to let you factor that. That means you are floating cash for 90 days. And you're probably pulling on a bank line of credit with a high interest rate right now in this environment.
Right.
So all
That's
of
what I
that gets pushed back. And so,
Yeah,
but
it's true.
to go back to your original call out, right, about cash flow and cash is king in this space. I often think about this, and I just challenge people to think for 1 second on this. This is one of the only industries I know where the entire business model is hinged on 6 to 26% margins. But right now, the average broker margins are somewhere in like the single digit to like mid-teens, I think. Your entire business, you could be running a $100 million company on 11% margins right now. And it's just crazy to me because it's like we're talking about such small gross revenue numbers, and that margin has to turn around and pay all the operational costs, all of the salaries, all the bills. And so, I've heard some founders in the space who were very successful, but they joked that, like, if you want to make a lot of money, don't get into brokerage or there's no money to be made until you sell it, right? It's like you get that big payday when it's successful and you get out, but the reality is when you're working in that day-to-day, it's a low margin industry, which means that the pennies and the dollars do matter. And so then when you introduce things like interest rates on factoring relationships and bank line of credits and cash flow cycles, that is like the core, the heart and soul of a successful brokerage is how they're managing that cash flow.
Yeah, and it's crazy when you think about the low margins, and if we keep our focus on the shipper side, right? Like, they're not. Some do, but they're not living in that world every day of saying, hey, you're only making 6-8%. What cost structure do you have? Are we forcing you to have layoffs and do less with more and lean into technology? So I'd be interested to see your thoughts on, do you feel like that conversation's changing with shippers in today's market compared to where we've been in the past? Because obviously a couple of years ago, right, there's no one's going to bring up that conversation because we had the load to truck ratio was extremely high. So compared to today's market, but do you feel like that conversation will ever change to where we still have to keep that margin at a reasonable price for these companies to be successful?
I think that this is a pretty complex topic, and I kind of play a devil's advocate. I was a broker. I still work with brokers, and I like to kind of be that devil's advocate when I'm talking to brokers about this. And my challenge to them is that I absolutely believe in mutually um, beneficial relationships where the providers give to make sure that the shipper's taken care of, and the shipper should turn around and reciprocate when it's called upon. But do you want your providers? I think from the shipper standpoint, it's just a matter of, do I care about this provider? And then do I need to give a little bit of a concession if I think that maybe they're struggling, or if they come to me and say this isn't working? However, one broker's 6% margin is somebody else's 16. And what I mean by
Yeah,
that is
that's true. That's right.
everybody operates a different operational model. And everybody has different levels of operational efficiencies that determine seat costs. So how much do you have to make to justify a head could be dramatically different depending on maybe how well you're utilizing technology, how well you're reutilizing the same carriers. If you can have one carrier rep, I think the average like number of loads booked for like the DAT board, Smile and Dial is like 10 to 12 a day or something like that in certain markets. If you are running with an 80% carrier reutilization rate, one rep can do 30 plus loads a day. So there's a lot of things that can go into your cost structure, and those determine your fixed costs, which determine minimal margins that are acceptable to be able to operate on the same lane or the same types of shipments. And so at the end of the day, it could just be the hard truth that your business model is not actually the best option for that shipper, no matter how much they like you and no matter how much you like them, because they also have budgets to keep. And so I'm constantly trying to challenge, any shippers or any brokers or carriers that I'm working with to think really hard about how efficient they are and what they're doing to streamline their operations, because that's going to go into your pricing efforts. Um, it's not this, oh, they just don't care about their partners and they want to run them out of business with these margins. It's somebody else, when they say this is the feedback we're getting, this is what other people are doing, these are the options we have. Everybody likes to just use the cop out of like, well, that's just a broker undercutting the market. But you don't know
Right.
that. And I can tell you, I was a broker and we ran some lanes that I almost couldn't even believe we were running for those rates.
We talk about that daily, don't we?
Absolutely. No, the customer, you have to meet their needs. I mean,
Yeah.
every customer is different. Some are going to pay a lot, and some are going to pay minimal
Yeah.
rates. But one thing that I've learned is don't fight the customer.
No.
You're going down a battle you don't want to be with, and trying to convince the customer that your way is right. No, they have their margins, like she said, and you got to make sure that you give them what they need as well.
Yeah. So Sam, so let's talk about like thinking of like the shipper still thinking about their, how they source or how they go choose, if they're going to choose an asset based carrier, if they're going to choose a broker, and if they're going to use a broker, maybe they use multiple brokers. So how does that relationship with the shipper help with the conversation you just brought up about, okay, your costing model's broke. You're 6%, somebody else is 16. I'm sorry, that's why I can't use you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I think that I advocate for and I hope for shippers to continue to be more and more educated on what goes on in the brokerage space, because that I've never seen a space that has more misconceptions than a lot of parts of freight, and specifically freight brokerage. And I was just talking about some of these recently, in that we've all heard the statistic that I think it's like over 80% of authorities are 5 trucks or less. And I don't know if you guys have heard that as far as asset carriers. And people make that argument for, use brokers because that's where 80% of the authorities are. Well, the reality is that is true. Okay, that is true. But since those are small fleets, 20% of trucks on the highway are less than 5 trucks or less. So a majority of trucks on the road belong to a fleet with 50 plus trucks. In fact, I think it's like 20 to 100 trucks is like 30%. And then the rest is mega fleets, 100 plus, somewhere in that range. And I probably got those numbers a little bit off. But the point is that 80% of contracted freight and 80% of a shipper's freight typically pushes through assets before it would go to brokers, 20% broker. So they're preferring these assets, right? And a lot of times the assets that are pulling those direct contracts are going to be the couple hundred trucks plus size fleets. And then of course your JB Hunts and your Swifts and all of that, they eat up so much of that. But that they aren't going direct to these 20 to 100 to maybe up to 200 truck fleets. And those represent over 30% of on highway capacity. And those fleet sizes are great operators. They know their stuff. They have the ability to do drop trailers. They're efficient. They have the staff that they need. You know, it's not this 5-truck operation where they can't have the equipment position when they need it. But overwhelmingly, they're going to be running through brokers. And so by saying I don't use brokers, or I don't use brokers for my drop trailers, or I don't use whatever, you're cutting out 30 something percent of highway capacity of the, like, I just call them like the sweet spot carriers. Those are the guys I want running my freight all day long. You know, big enough to do it well, small enough to care. And a lot of blue blood family run trucking companies are going to sit right in that size range. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of them don't know how to sell very well. They're good operators. They don't get themselves out there to those shippers. And they also, it takes a lot of resources in the brokerage space. Like if you think about all of our operational costs, a lot of it's on technology, EDI integrations, reporting, account management on everything that's going on every day, managing the payables and the cash flow. If a carrier runs through a broker, they don't have to do any of that. So it allows them to operate a much more efficient cost structure and pass through lower costs when they don't have to staff account management, you know, as much staffing on the payable side, these longer cash flow terms. They don't have to adhere to the shipper's 60, 90, 120 because they're getting the 30 or the 15 from the broker. So all of that being said, there's so much opportunity as a shipper to not ignore the brokers who are effectively utilizing that mid-cap carrier base that they really want. You want those carriers hauling your freight. So to summarize, if I was a shipper, I would get really comfortable asking the question, can you explain to me your carrier sourcing strategy? And then listen when I'm talking to a broker. Because it's going to be super obvious the second
Good info.
second they answer, they're either going to know what they're doing and they're going to answer it well because they know their carriers, they know their strategy, or they're going to start stumbling through how they use DAT and how they have 80,000 partner carriers. And you're going to know instantly that they're not bringing you those trucks you want.
And we were actually talking about that this morning. To what your point you just said was these 1 to 5 trucks, just think about the maintenance side of that. If they're over the road, what type of support do they have when a truck breaks down? Usually they're at the mercy of where they're at. And the quickest way to disrupt a supply chain, especially for one customer and one shipment, is have a truck break down whenever they have a construction site sitting there waiting for it.
What's the average age of their equipment to that point?
Yeah.
There's a lot of trucks who have larger fleets run
be older.
pretty regular replacement schedules where they're averaging 3-year-old equipment.
Yep. And then the authority with one truck is going to be usually an older truck. They're trying to get started. They're using something that's got high miles, and now you're leveraging the face of your. If you're a broker, you're taking the face of your business, a driver you've never met before that has a truck with 1.5 million miles on it. You're putting something very hot on their back because they got a construction site waiting for it, and then it breaks down. Like, to talk about a way to have a hard conversation with your customer. Where these mid-side fleets, which you were talking about this morning, they have that maintenance, or they can send another truck to go get it cross-loaded. Yep.
I can't say enough good things about, like, even the smaller to mid-size trucking companies, because trucking is hard. Running fleets is hard, especially through lower market cycles. And if they've been around for 5+ years and they have 20 to 100 trucks, they know what they're doing. They really do. When you find AYZ trucking off of DAT in a market, you have no idea what that person knows, doesn't know, can do, can't do, if they're going to be in business tomorrow, if they already went out of business the day before and they just haven't told you yet. You have to figure all these things out just to use them, the time it takes to vet them, the risks that you're exposing yourself to, and ultimately to your shipper. My response to people who ask, like, well, how many broker partners does a shipper really need? Well, if they're all running a transactional model with their carriers off of load board sourcing strategies, you need one or two. That's it. Because they all have access to exactly the same load board.
Same capacity. Yeah.
And it's not different. So if they can articulate some type of strategy that tells you that they're partnering with fleets, and they can double down and say we're going to be strongest in these metros because we have the best core carrier bases here, even better, right? And so that's what I would be looking for. As a shipper, I would be looking for the niche pockets where I'm going to save money in my budget and have peace of mind that I have a super high quality provider moving out of that distribution center or that manufacturing location because I utilized this broker, and maybe this broker's never going to run $5-10 million with me. But you know what? Every single year, they're going to crush that $1.2 million that they take every year, and I don't have to worry about it. I'm okay with that. I would be okay with that as a shipper.
I got a question then based on what you just said. So I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it very specific anyway. So how important is the relationship from a shipper to any provider that they're using? Because I still see a tendency of sometimes they don't want that deep relationship, right? You're just a provider for me.
Sure.
But the ones that are very successful and that see a very high level service is the ones that lean on that relationship extremely high.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, shipper of choice was like everything, all you heard about during COVID, right? Because the reality of the early days of COVID was there was more volume than trucks in most cases. And so if you were low on someone's, crap list as a shipper, like you were just not gonna get your freight moved that day because everyone in that market knew you were the last place I want to go into. So then maybe they just had a little bit of fun with it and they were like, yeah, I'll go in there for 3,000 above the already inflated market, right? And I mean, that was a harsh reality and it was a wake up call. And so a lot of shippers did, and I applaud them for this. They made the necessary changes to be able to, whatever it was, offer bathrooms, to do something to make sure that these carriers were taken care of and that they were treated well. Decrease the number one driver, by the way, of like being noted as a bad shipper or receiver or increased rates is detention. Like any idle time a carrier has or a broker has to have to pay their carrier will increase your rates. Just if you get a reputation for detention and slow loadings, forget it. You're not a shipper of choice in any means. You can have the cleanest bathrooms and all the snacks, and nobody's going to care if you were taking 4 hours to load your trucks. So all that being said, you figure that out and make sure that you're a shipper of choice. That is a 365 days a year effort. That is not a high market ever, a low market ever. Like that just stays consistent. And when you are that shipper, then you have earned and you should expect and tolerate nothing less than a carrier or broker of choice. So it's like dating, I guess, and dating relationships where if you're going to be a really, really great partner and you're not going to accept somebody down here, right? You want someone to meet your effort and to match that level of respect and commitment and effort. And it's the same in business relationships where if you're going to take everything that you can and put it into making sure you're a shipper of choice, then you should not tolerate anything less than a broker carrier of choice as well.
If you are a shipper that is not desirable because you have 4 to 6, be transparent about it. Have, again, you said it earlier, like bring truth to transportation.
Yeah.
Like you're probably going to have to let the rate reflect that on the front end and not hit them on the back end.
I have a story I'll share to highlight that. And when we were growing Rocket, we had a shipper. Any new business is exciting, right? When you're a startup. So we got into the RFP. We did pretty well. We were awarded, I don't know, it was like 10 or 12 lanes on contractual 6-month RFP. And we started running it and we realized that several of those lanes, we were, just having some issues with the receiving sites. And we had a very strict SOP process for 30, 60, 90-day business reviews where every single load, and I recommend this to any broker on a new shipper coming in, every single shipment we had just like a Google sheet, and it was like you put in the load number and then you put in anything that went on with it, any notes whatsoever. Like load tender didn't have the right phone number, right? Things like that. So we were keeping track of all this. We were documenting it meticulously. And then after running it for a few weeks, we realized when we're talking to our carriers, they're like, I'm not going in there. Oh, that's where it's going to. I'm not going in there. And so, we start trying and trying, and we're pushing through this. And we actually had carriers pre-sourced on those lanes. And then after the carriers ran it a couple times and realized where it was going into, they said, you can ask me, but I'm not going to commit to this anymore. Because we were running into awful treatment at this receiver. Our drivers would get cussed out at the guard shack. They would get screamed at and told they didn't have an appointment. And then 10 minutes later, they'd be like, oh, just kidding, door 4. After they just for fun berated them. And then the unloadings would take forever. And sometimes they would just close the doors to close down. I don't know if they didn't have staffing, whatever, open the next day. So it was horrible, right? We were struggling there and we were losing engagement from our carriers. So as a broker, the only way to run that successfully is to say to your carriers, I know it's going to be crap. I know you're going to have problems going in there. We will 100% make this whole and right by you every single time. Will you please do this for us? And then you pay that detention, you pay that layover quickly, right? You don't wait to get it approved. That's another thing. We had to go back and ask for approval from shipper on detentions and things. And sometimes it would take us 30, 45 days to get those paid back. So it's hurting our cash flow even more, right? So when I come to find out, right, this shipper knew this. They knew everything about these lanes, and we were the new broker in the RFP. So every 6 months, the person who ran it before obviously didn't want it again. So they had to let at least one new person in to give them the award. And it was an example to me. We ended up firing the customer. There came a point where I was like, it's not worth it to work with you because it was such an operational constraint and it was such an unfortunate experience for our carriers, right, that we cared about, that I didn't even feel right authorizing, sending some of our partners in there anymore. And so that was the first customer that I ever fired in a startup life. And that's not fun, right? When you're trying to make revenue and you have to
You're
fire
trying to earn business.
Yeah, but to that point, you could just simply say in an RFP, these are our ugly lanes. They're not going to operate well, but can we come to some type of mutual agreement that's not outrageous, but I understand it's not going to operate at market rate. And you know what? You would have someone take 100% tender acceptance, operate it well, and you would have less headaches and probably less money paid out if you just did that and trusted someone to take your ugly stuff.
But that goes back to if you hear me preach anything on the carrier side, the customer side, that relationship matters. So if you're having those hard conversations on the front end, you're not having to fire a customer. And that's one thing I'm teaching my team now is get it all in the front, have a great relationship, because then you can overcome some stuff because you bring transparency to the carrier and you're bringing transparency to the shipper. Because at the end of the day, that's why I like that specialty model, not the cradle to grave model, where you have somebody responsible for the carrier to make sure that they're always taken care of, that they want to come back and do business with you. But at the same time, having somebody responsible for the customer to make sure that they're taken care of well. That's why I love that model, to make sure that both sides of the aisle, if you will, is getting taken care of.
One more example too I think this is a really important topic when we're talking about shippers and relationships and how you can interact. I worked with a enterprise shipper. I mean, they had almost $1 billion of freight under management. And they blatantly, honestly, right up front, they said, you're not going to run with us unless you're going to be running probably at least $5 million in your first year. And you're going to be taking volume, and you're not going to make high margins on us. And they were so transparent because the types of operational model they had, their business model was like discounted foods and products. So there's not margins in their products, right? So it makes sense. It's like bottled water, right? This wasn't a bottled water company, but when there's no margins in the products, every cent that you spend on the transportation to get it to a store shelf cuts into your margins. So it makes sense. But what these people did is they said, we're a volume account. And that's where you're going to have to make your money, is on those slim margins over time. Now, what that means to the provider is if you have a really high fixed operational cost where allotting people to that volume will not operate on 9% margins, don't take the business. You should know right up front, right, that that's not the freight for you. Speaking from experience, we ended up working with them as a startup at Rocket. And I think, you know, in the last month I was there, we were 70, 85 loads a month. We were running on single digit margins, but we learned over time that their coordinators were all very, very good. We didn't have issues. Like the account was pretty easy to execute. The portals were self-serve. We could do integrations to accept tenders into our TMS. It operated, right? It pretty seamlessly. There was, I mean, I've never gone into better receiving sites. It was all inbound for them, right? And the receiving sites were clockwork. We rarely had any type of detention or layover. And so it was consistent volumes. We had committed carriers that executed on it. I would have ran that account all day at 7-8% margins over some of the customer I fired where I was making 15, right? So it just depends. But when you're honest upfront as a shipper about what they should expect from you, then hopefully that broker or carrier is honest with themselves. It's not even so much about being honest with the shipper. It's being honest with yourself to say, does that work for my model, or am I just hoping to see dollar signs and I'm going to blindly like let myself waste time and fall into something?
So to kind of close us out and bring us home, what about the shipper's expectation and honestly, the end user, right? Because Amazon, COVID, whatever you want to point it at, that business to consumer has become a huge topic, right? Where the expectations of people is really the speed to market, getting it in my cart and having it that next day. How does that translate into the shipper as well when you're having these conversations with new brokers, new carriers to say, hey, the expectation of my customer is this, or can you meet these requirements? Because I know early in my set, we didn't have as many of those conversations except, hey, we're trying to hit what the industry says that this lane should do. Yeah. Does that make sense what I'm asking? Like, how does the expectation look now from a shipper's perspective compared to what it did maybe 3-5 years ago?
I would just say that, again, I'm always a little bit of a devil's advocate. So their expectations are probably based on incumbent performance. And so if they're saying something needs to be done and you're like, oh, that's higher than what the industry says, well, okay. But I bet they have incumbents who are hitting them. So to me, it's just, this is a competitive marketplace. There are 29,000 active broker authorities right now. So you're not special, right? Until you prove you're special. And so if you want to, whatever, it's probably the big boys, right? Who are saying, I want to see 99% KPIs, or I need all of this. Or if you're running, you know, the bigger guys are going to be the ones running into retailers. You know, you can't be early to a delivery in retail. So like the expectations have never been higher that are being set by these shippers' customers as standards pushed to them. They have every right to push them back to the provider who has to execute on that service and expect those KPIs to be met within their whatever limits they're asking for, 90%, 95, 98%, whatever it is. And just, that's the harsh reality that I tell people is if you don't do it, it's okay. Somebody else will. So that's how it is these days. And so I do think that it's adjusting to the ever increasing standards that our industry is putting out there. But it's also about improving. Like we should be constantly improving. So retail, you know, OTD, this has all been developing and getting more and more intense for years now. And we don't have the excuse now to be like, well, this is new. Well, I don't know how to accommodate this. Well, it's just the world we live in now, and we have to figure out how to adapt and operate and meet those expectations. And people are doing it, and people are doing it successfully. They're doing it well. They're doing it in ways that make their businesses money. And so that's I guess that's my thoughts on that, is that you have 29,000 competitors right now, and so you don't get to make excuses, right? You either do it or you don't.
Yeah, the only thing that sets you apart is the person going in there selling, pretty much. The people you do business with, because you said it already, pretty much the same capacity. It's my lanes. The lane's the same. So it's who you do business with, how successful you are, and meet my expectations. I mean, it's a pretty simple recipe, even though it's still challenging.
I'm still learning a lot about this broker and stuff. Thank you, Samantha, for coming on and teaching me. I feel like I've learned more than helped. So
yeah,
if y'all ever want to talk about the carrier side, the big trucks and the mechanic side, that's where I operate.
You know, that's a great call out, because carrier side has all of its own complexities, of course, but there's a whole less layer in there. So it's a little bit more simplistic in the sense that by nature, brokering is one person having to intermediate between two different parties. And when you are the trucks, it's usually, if it's you to the shipper or you to the broker, you're only interacting with one party. So I think that's why I'm kind of addicted to brokerage, because it's so dynamic and you have so much going on two different sides all the time. We're a little bit crazy as psychos in the brokerage space. We like a lot.
There's no better way to put it than we are absolutely insane. So
we just rely on you truckers to keep us a little bit sane.
While we were talking, I had a truck go down and they're texting me and calling me, telling me, what do we do? I said, can y'all not handle it?
Yeah.
I'm be gone for 30 minutes. Caleb puts a prompt on the TV and said, it's an emergency. A truck went down. He can sit there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll let you get to that emergency.
Well, Sam, thank you for joining that Trucking Gospel. We really appreciate the insight you have. And how do we get a hold of you, Sam? What's the best way to get a hold of you? If they want to reach out to you and say, hey, come in and have some great conversations with us, how would they reach out to you the best way?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very present and active on LinkedIn. So Samantha Jones, you can look me up there. I do have a website. It's connectsjc.com. That's for Samantha Jones Consulting. So connectsjc.com. More coming soon on the website. Really excited about that. Been working on a lot, but there is a form that you can fill out right now to get in touch with me, and I'll make sure to get back to you soon.
As always, I appreciate you. Thank you for your insight, and keep putting out those market updates. I selfishly read them all the time. So
absolutely. Subscribe to my newsletter on LinkedIn. You'll get a truckload freight market update every month.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And until next time, we'll see you.
Thank you guys for tuning into that Trucking Gospel. New episodes every Tuesday. You can find us on all our social media platforms. Thank you guys. Till next time.